US and Iranian officials to sit down tomorrow for nuclear talks in the capital of Oman. The meeting in Muscat taking place amid concerns in the region that Donald Trump could take military action against Tehran.
Look, I think in order for talks to actually lead to something meaningful, they will have to include certain things.
That demand to go beyond just Iran's nuclear program, putting talks in jeopardy. The White House insisting earlier it would only attend talks in Turkey in response to Iranian proposals on Tuesday for a change in venue. Also dispute the scope of discussions. Tehran insisting talks touching only on its nuclear work. Are concerns in the region that tensions that have spiraled since Tehran's crackdown on protests last month could trigger outright conflict. President Donald Trump ordering a build-up of America's military presence, warning of bad things if talks should fail. Today sees the expiration of the last remaining nuclear arms treaty between the US and Russia. New START, which was signed in 2010 and taking effect in 2011, placed limits on the world's two largest nuclear arsenals. The Kremlin says it regrets the end of this agreement, while NATO has urged, quote, responsibility and restraint. For the first time since the early 1970s, there are no formal guardrails on the nuclear arms race.
To understand what's at stake with the expiry of New START, we need to go back to the late 1960s, the height of the Cold War. It was then that both sides acknowledged that unchecked nuclear competition was dangerous. That led to the first strategic arms limitation talks. Over the years, several treaties followed. Some capped missile numbers, others eliminated entire classes of weapons. After the Cold War, the efforts intensified. In 1991, the first Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, START I, dramatically cut nuclear stockpiles. That treaty expired in 2009. To avoid a vacuum, the US and Russia negotiated a replacement that became New START, signed in 2010 and entering into force the following year. The treaty was designed to last 10 years with the option of a single 5-year extension. That was agreed at the last moment in early 2021. It pushed the deadline to today. So, what exactly does New START do? At its core, it sets hard limits. Both the US and Russia are capped at 1,550 deployed strategic nuclear warheads each. The treaty also limits the number of launchers, missiles and bombers that can be deployed. But New START is not just about numbers, it's also about transparency. It requires regular data exchanges, it mandates notifications when weapons are moved or modified, and allows short notice on-site inspections as detailed by an official CNA spoke to who worked directly on the treaty.
Management came down to two big things. One was data and one was dialogue. And those were the two main components of management between the US and Russia in terms of strategic arms. So on the one hand, on the data side, it was an accounting exercise. You had data exchanges, you had notifications, you had a lot of data passing back and forth between each side to say, this is what we have, this is how we're under the treaty. On the dialogue side, you had the ability in a structured way to talk to the other side about any problems that arose over the course of the
The treaty, however, has already been weakened. In 2023, President Vladimir Putin suspended Russia's participation. He cited U.S. support for Ukraine. Washington responded by halting its own treaty obligations. As a result, inspections and data exchanges stopped. Yet something important remained. Both sides continued to signal they were still sticking to the treaty's core numerical limits. And so far, there has been no evidence of large-scale breaches. That shows New START still mattered in a weakened form, which is why its expiry is so significant.
The day immediately after the treaty's expiration is not going to look dramatically different than the day that the treaty was still in force. But like any other arms control agreement, you think about an erosion over time. You think about, on this day, with the Russians and the United States, each side knows pretty clearly what the other side has in terms of strategic offensive arms, what they have, where they are, what they're doing. Over time, you will lose confidence in this sort of perfect data that each side has in the other side.
Last year, Mr. Putin proposed a one-year informal extension of New START's core limits. Mr. Trump said the idea sounds good, but no formal agreement followed. Last month, the U.S. leader suggested that if New START expires, a better agreement could be negotiated with China's involvement. No further details have been offered. But Beijing has reiterated its refusal to join disarmament talks.
中方在中美俄三方核军控谈判问题上的立场是明确的，中美的核力量完全不在一个量级。现阶段要求中方加入核裁军谈判，既不公平，也不合理。
Today, there are more than 12,000 nuclear warheads worldwide. Nearly 10,000 are in military stockpiles, ready for potential use. The US and Russia together account for 90% of the total. China, meanwhile, is rapidly expanding its arsenal, estimated at around 600 warheads. Other nuclear-armed states, including North Korea, Israel, India, Pakistan, the UK and France, are also modernizing their forces. In this environment, the loss of New START sends a powerful signal. If the biggest nuclear powers no longer accept limits, why should anyone else?
And for more on this, Dasha Chernyshova covering the story for CNN from Moscow, and Toni Waterman joins us from Washington, D.C. Toni, let's start with you. On nuclear warheads, that's the US and Russia, but talks tomorrow with Iran, not known to have nuclear warheads, but highly enriched uranium. Tomorrow's talks already dispute over venue and the exact scope of discussion. Can we expect any common ground?
Well, I mean, the fact that they were struggling to find common ground on where to even hold these talks, if that is any sort of indication, this could be very difficult going forward. And in fact, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, tried to manage expectations on Wednesday, telling reporters that I'm not even sure if you can make a deal with these guys, but we're going to try. The big issue is that both of these countries are coming into these negotiations with very different agendas and quite emphatic that they are not going to stray from those agendas. Iran only wants to discuss the possibility of limiting its nuclear program and the lifting of sanctions, nothing else. And the U.S. not only wants to talk about that, but it also wants to discuss Tehran's missile program, militia groups, and these most recent violent crackdowns on nationwide protesters in Iran. The U.S. has more leverage here. It now has about 12 warships in and around the region in the Middle East. Tens of thousands of troops are in the region. And President Trump, who has shown that he is not afraid to take military action, as we saw just last month in Venezuela. And he gave this interview to NBC on Wednesday. And in that interview, Trump warned Iran's supreme leader that he should be very worried. And Iran in recent days, of course, has deployed this surveillance drone near the USS Lincoln warship. It has tried to board a U.S. flagged ship in the Strait of Hormuz. Mediators are really trying to drive momentum here, even if it's not there organically. You have Turkey's President Erdogan urging leaders to sit down and talk. But, you know, these are the first nuclear talks that the both sides have engaged in since last spring. And it's very unlikely that there's going to be any sort of resolution or major advancement after these talks on Friday.
Toni, President Trump commenting on the expiry of the New START treaty, speaking last month, saying if it expires, it expires. What does that suggest about Washington's move next with the end of the New START treaty?
You know, even before this treaty expired, there had been a lot of questions about whether this arms race is already underway. Those on-site inspections, which were meant to ensure some sort of, transparency that both sides were living up to this agreement, that actually stopped in 2020 due to the pandemic. And then Russia went on to suspend its participation in the overall deal 3 years ago amid the war in Ukraine. Both sides have kind of stepped back from this in recent years. Whether this now ramps up at pace is the big question. Trump has already alluded last year that the U.S. plans to resume underground nuclear detonation tests, and the U.S. has been investing hundreds of billions of dollars to modernize its nuclear arsenal, the so-called nuclear triad. So this is technology for land, sea, and air. It delivers things like, or it includes things like these delivery systems, warheads, command infrastructure. So this would be a complete upgrade on Cold War technology. You have to remember that the U.S. has not built a new fully constituted nuclear weapon since 1989. So much of what they have on hand is decades old. Some still want to see this treaty renewed in some form, a new shape, whatever it may be. The White House does not want to be, though, on the back foot if that doesn't happen.
All right, Dasha, let's bring you in here. From the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin last year suggesting he was open to extending by 1 year the New START treaty. Any response beyond that at this point?
Well, the Kremlin has so far been saying that it was intending to continue the negotiations on the extension of the New START treaty, and the Russian president has been suggesting indeed an extension by 12 more months. To that, Moscow says there's been no response from the United States, which itself is a response. And Moscow has been saying that that means that the U.S. is simply not interested in that. But at the same time, what Moscow has been suggesting as well is that it has done its utmost to make sure that this deal is on the table and that there is a way to find the cap to the nuclear arsenals. We also hear in the Russian side suggesting that they are open for the further contacts with the United States on this matter. So the expectation is that certainly there should be some more negotiations on probably a new pact that the two sides could be working on. But having said that, you have to keep in mind that Russia is going to, what it says, adhere to a very restrained policy when it comes to extending its nuclear arsenal, with the Russian officials all saying on Thursday that Russia will be very cautiously assessing the overall security situation and take decisions on the extension of its nuclear arsenals based on that. But also you have to keep in mind that the US has been indicating that it wants to have China in this deal, and many analysts here have been suggesting that Russia is probably seen as the side that could be bringing Beijing into this possible deal, and this is why the US may be quite restrained and unwilling to extend the current form of the New START treaty. But with response to that, the Russian Foreign Ministry has been saying that, well, if you talk about the extension of the number of participants to any sort of the deal like this, you have to include Germany, you have to include France and the United Kingdom. So there are options on the table, but for now, Moscow regrets the US decision.
Well, thanks, Dasha Chernyshova reporting for CNN from Moscow and Toni Waterman from Washington, D.C.